Go next to the microphone. Yeah. All right. Okay. You got it right. You got it right.
Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. Welcome to the New Zealand Portrait Gallery. My name is Sam Walker. I am one of the supervisors here at the gallery. And today we have an artist talk between Telly Tuita and the Dowse Art Museum curator and director Karl Chitham. So at first, a little bit of housekeeping. As there's artworks in the middle of the space, we're going to potentially be moving around. So yeah, feel free to like sort of shift your seat. Yeah. Although we do have a pretty good view of Telly's work. Cool. So yeah. If you're looking for the bathrooms, they are in the back and to the left. And if there's an emergency, I'll lead us. So yeah, don't worry too much about that. But our main exit is the front doors that you would have come in. So artist Telly Tuita, holds a degree in Fine Arts and Education. Following his study, Tuita has worked as an art teacher and within special education while maintaining his own art practice and exhibiting at group shows throughout Australia. Since moving to New Zealand, Tuita has exhibited widely across Aotearoa and has been a finalist in a number of art awards, including the National Contemporary Art Award and the Molly Morpeth Kennedy Award. His work is the focus of a recent major survey exhibition at Campbelltown Art Centre in Sydney. And today, Telly is in conversation with Karl Chitham, who is also a trained artist and educator. He was curator at Aotearoa Museum and director and curator at Aotearoa Art Gallery before becoming director of the Dowse Art Museum in 2019. Throughout his career, Karl has worked to increase the profile of Toi Māori and Māori artists. He was a founding trustee of the Waiora Māori Art Gallery in the Hunders Fort Centre in Whangarei, the first dedicated public Māori art gallery nationally. He has written for multiple art publications, including co-authoring the groundbreaking publication Crafting Aotearoa. Karl serves on charitable art trusts and is in advisory positions for various institutions and art organisations. Today, Karl and Telly will be discussing the topics that weave through the exhibition. So sorry, that's one of those words, isn't it? And Telly's practice, including atua, gods, popular culture, and stories related to his life and career from Tonga to Australia and now to Aotearoa. Please help me in welcoming Telly and Karl.
Hello.
Hi, Karl.
Hi.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. If you can't hear us properly, just give us a wave from the back. We're going to talk very loudly because we're loud talkers. Yes, you do.
Sorry, Dad.
Yeah. That was a very long intro, probably unnecessary, but
I have to add in there, Karl, what I quite like that Karl is doing this talk, he's one of the first people in this country to have seen my works from when I started as a baby here in Aotearoa.
Well, we'll start there then. One of the things that we talked about when we were thinking about what we would converse about today was this idea of gods and divas. So one of the projects that Telly and I had worked on previously, which was Whetū Rangitia Made as Stars, an exhibition at the Dowse Art Museum, was an investigation into how contemporary artists translate their cultural histories through imagery around the gods. So And for a lot of Indigenous cultures, the gods aren't mythological, they're part of our history. So it's not something that is made up or imaginary, it's actually part of our whakapapa or lineage. So I'm really interested, because this show is so much about that, for you to maybe talk to this idea of the gods and where that originated for you in your practice.
I think start right from the beginning. So born in Tonga, 1980, grew up there until 1989, and I was literally sort of sent to Australia. Oh, hi Mosh. Oh, this is my daughter. And her friends. Hi. That's nice. You were supposed to be my assistants today. You got fired. Hi. Right, the whole finance here. Anyway, back to it. So, I suppose gods, I mean, just that term alone, you know, it does go without saying, you know, being born in Tonga, you know, it's a very religious country. I mean, you can pick whatever denomination you want in Tonga, because most of the major religions are there. And so, you know, that understanding of the spiritual God, or the Western God, was made apparent to me very, very early on in my age, in my young days in Tonga, from 0 to 9. And so, I suppose then the shift in my understanding of the world and the world of gods then changed, you know, dramatically when one night flew into Australia at the age of 9 to live with complete strangers, and you know, really just that cord of my Tongan culture was cut that night, which meant then, you know, religion and ongoing practices at church. And so, you know, when you sort of, it was actually quite superstitious in Tonga when I grew up, so there is elements of Christianity, but then there's also elements of, you know, sort of pagan, you know, sort of religious ideas of, you know, bad spirits, good spirits, you know, all of that stuff. So, I suppose it is a spiritual thing, but it's a very real world thing for me, because obviously we live in, you know, the new millennium, and you know, gods are very different. The concept of gods are very different today, particularly to the young, particularly to the, you know, the people who are being idolized as figures of, you know, something else that's not us normal people. I think that's an interesting idea as well of how, you know, the concept of God, spirituality, has shifted so dramatically. And I think, sort of going a little bit to arty-farty talk, but either Jung or one of those Europeans said, you know, when the death of God happens, the world's going to go to the end. I quite like that as well, even though I'm not very religious.
Hello. There's a particular god that was sort of an origin figure for you in terms of your practice. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So, girls, can you give one to
everyone? Oh, that's right.
You don't get to keep this, you're just going to sort of have a look. So, you know, I suppose appropriation of ideas, cultures, practices. I mean, artists do that. In my case, this one figure, which is, you know, a survival of, I suppose, our ancient pagan religion. You know, she's quite important because, you know, like her, you have to adjust in the new world, and, you know, even for something sort of. So this figure is called Hikaleo, and she is, I suppose, the physical remnant of an ancient culture, an ancient religion in Tonga. You know, I feel quite spoiled when I moved to Aotearoa, particularly Māori with the marae and, you know, the atua everywhere. That doesn't really exist in Tonga because, you know, Christianity is dominant. And so we don't have a lot of those, you know, spiritual artifacts that Māori do. But I think a common link between Hikaleo and Māori is that, you know, Hikaleo is actually a real person. You know, it's a real person who lived once upon a time, I think. And particularly her carving figures, I've realised that they're all attributed to Hegela, but they're all quite different. One has bigger hips, one has bigger breasts, one's got slightly sort of small shoulders, one's got a bigger bulbous head. And so when you have differences of the portrait of one person, I feel that, you know, like when you see the portraits here, I feel that they are different people, even though the name articulates as Hegela. I think, like anyone who's done migration or anyone who's moved to a new town, you feel lost. And so, you know, me moving to Tonga at the age of 9, I felt bloody lost. Like I didn't know anybody, I didn't know where I was. You know, all I was told was this, you know, I call it the Wizard of Oz. Like I was told that I was going to go to the wonderful land of Oz, which it was. But, you know, with the land of Oz, you get all of the great things and the bad things with it as well. And part of that was that umbilical cord of my culture was cut. But, you know, celebrate it, mourn it, that's what I do, but also, you know, I then was living in a completely different world, and so I had to adjust to that. And I think, particularly later at high school and then university, this figure became quite a prominent person in, you know, sort of me trying to attain that connection to my culture, but also just learn a lot more of, let's say, you know, in Tonga, I mean, she's really a pagan thing now. Like, you know, this is not what we believe in Tonga because Christianity is the major religion. But, you know, that's something tangible for me when I was living in Australia and, you know, doing my art and learning about my history that, you know, this one figure is like such a big evidence of something else that we were. Does that make sense?
Which makes me think as well about the other part of what we've sort of decided to talk about today, which is divas. So technically, Hegela is a diva. But
She is.
She is, the originator. But the other thing that you've talked about are references to Maria Callas, who is known in more of a contemporary context as a diva, which might be along the same lines as Mariah.
Prima donna.
Yeah. And Mariah Carey and all those people.
Just a diva.
But we've talked a little bit about, you know, how you think about that idea of what a diva is and how it relates to your cultural upbringing, but also to your practice.
Yeah, I think part of my practice is universality because of the world that I've lived in, the world that I do live in now. Like, I can't sort of profess to be one thing or another now because, you know, very proudly Tongan, as I am, very rooted in that. But my identity as it is today as a 44-year-old, you know, man is quite big and diverse, and my experiences are diverse as well. And I think with divas and with my art practice, I've coined it TONGPOP, if people haven't read that. And I mean, just visually, that is TONGPOP. It is that collision of what like, there's a little bit of this in there, there's a little bit of that. Diva for me is, I like wordplay, and so if you know the Latin origins of diva, it's a deified person, eventually. So, you know, and then diva with our understanding of what diva is today. It's just finding those common links, you know, through time, through history. It sort of is that's a Moana concept as well, of ta and va, so, you know, bridging non-linear time. And I think with my practice, I always do that because, as I said, you know, I'm 1,000 different people. And so my works and my ideas for those works are equally 1,000 different ideas. And so I think diva is, you know, because I quite like wordplay, diva is such a contemporary word and so loaded with urbanism, music, fashion, you know, but again, you know, it has that very ancient roots, not only in sort of, let's say, Greek culture, but also in Tongan and Māori culture as well, where, you know, a real person, you know, through acts of whatever, or their lineage, or their hierarchy, they are then deified eventually, and they cross over to that path of, you know, heavenly status. But, you know, I always liked that element of the real, of the world, of, you know, real world events that actually has given that rise to, you know, this wishy-washy idea of heaven. Does that make sense?
Does to me. But I'm interested, like, the idea that you're putting, because you're the model,
Yeah.
that you're putting yourself in these positions of being the deity or the diva. And I'm quite interested for you to talk about the Four Horsemen, which is these four portraits right next to us, which also relate to the seasons, but they also relate back to TONGPOP and this kind of collision of things. Can you talk a little bit about each of the images?
Yeah, I think archetypes, as the show says, archetype being the first of something. And at this time, moving to Aotearoa, I mean, I literally, I had this idea for this photographic series before I moved here. This idea of the Four Horsemen was there already, obviously, if anyone knows the Bible, or, is indoctrinated or grew up with that, the Bible, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I think this was sort of made almost, it was pre-COVID, but it was still of that era, political stuff was happening in the world, and so you can't see it sometimes, but, those events around the world do influence my art making. And then, even just something as simple as the symbolism of the seasons, they're quite powerful and also universal again. We've got our own sort of seasonal deities. The deities in Europe, we all know about. But I always found that that the Four Horsemen were like the four seasons you went bad. It's like, and so it's, always that, just the crossbreeding of who they are. But, I think with most of the works, as you know, Karl, there is always an element of biography. I'm a bit dramatic sometimes, and, I think I never hide from all of the different sides of my personality. And I think with a work like this, you can't see it, but there are elements of my personality in there. I sort of waffled on a bit, but...
No, that's good. So, just for those people that don't know, a lot of these works are made in Telly's backyard.
Actually, in fact, every work was photo shot in the backyard, actually, yeah.
So it's this idea that you're sort of creating these scenes or these moments which reflect all of those different things that are coming in or coming out of you, but that it's very much grounded in your everyday life as well.
So there's a whole production. So I have to make the backdrops, I make the props, the costumes. Research was a bit into that. Even the colour codes of the seasons and the Four Horsemen are represented in each shot. Little details like that. Even the boots there, you can see a black horse in the famine. There's just little tidbits that I can play with in pre-production, because there's not a lot of post-production, so there's no digital editing going on. There's no, let me, give my legs a bit longer or make my neck, there's none of that going on. And so I quite like that, because, with when I've worked with kids, they're like, oh, what did you, they think that I've sort of digitally done everything, which I quite like, because at the end of the day, it's the complete opposite. It's completely homemade, decoupage sort of thing back in your, it's old school homemade stuff, yeah.
So with these new works, so we've got these banners that are hanging here, we've got the two works over on the far wall, and then the digitally produced ones over here. You've started taking your sort of self out of them by having this kind of full body leotard.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
It's been a slow progression. So the first photographic series that I did when I moved to Aotearoa was this series here, behind you, called A Professional Brown Man. On top of that, I always try and recycle. So there's another edition called TONGPOP Souvenir Family, which had me in the suit, but then had my daughter dressed up in Fantasia stuff. And so it was a mother, daughter, and father portrait. And it was called, what was it, baby? TONGPOP Souvenirs or something, Antoinette, yes. And so, particularly at this time, there are other portraits that I've done in Sydney as a teacher that I'd always practice art. And it has a lot of my face in it. It even has a lot of sort of body, so just really putting it all out there. But in this series, and also if you know, there's a story about, I never had portraits or images of me before the age of 9. So there's another side to the idea of capturing yourself. And so all of those years in Australia, I think I captured myself, full, face. When I got here, I just felt, no one ever sort of deals with their own, sort of whatevers, but to me I had. And so that means I allowed myself to start covering myself up and play those other characters that, either represent, the inner me or, other ideas of the world. And it's just a lot easier actually when you're playing, it's like theatre. I mean, I love theatre, that's the other reason why, you're going to bring up my colours. I love theatre, I love opera, I love that fantasy of a production, where everything is going into it. And so, really, that idea and many others went into me sort of eventually covering my face. And then I think this one. As much as I love my little bee gut here, for me, I was like, I want to get more into the fantasy. And so then the following series, which is the Love and War series and the Devil or Divas. And I've got another series that's already done, which is based on Amai, who travelled to England. And so I'm actually dressed in a black bodysuit for that. So just, even though it is a bodysuit, sometimes metallic, what it does, it sort of takes me on, that fantasy journey a bit more because, look at the patchy. For me, I look at the details like that, which takes me out of the fantasy. If you're a bit of a film buff, when you see things that I takes you out of fantasy. So with the progression of my performing self-portraits, it's more about just getting more into the characters, really. And for me, I feel like I've done enough self-portraits that now I can do more self-portraits, but add in other things that are making my life interesting, or makes me interesting, or makes the world interesting. So.
You touched on the Divolo Divas,
yep.
And Divolo kind of goes back to this idea of mythology or history, depending on your perspective. Can you talk about that?
So deep research into Devolo, the term Devolo, it is a derivative of devil, but with more research, people are finding that the possibility that that term existed pre-European. But in term, it does sound like devil. Again, if you look deeper into Tongan superstition and stories of bipolar, people going through emotional distress, one of the first things that they say is that the devil made me do it, or so it's this sickness, I suppose, or an ailment, which then a lot of it's not just Tonga. There's other islands who do the same thing, where they're saying. But my research also with my own experiences that a devil, or even though it could be a demon, a bad demon, it's that sort of yin and yang. Like, I don't think they're all bad. I think some devils are good devils. And so even the term devil is one of those. So I don't know a lot of Tongan anymore, but there's key words and key sentences that I still remember to this day. And one of them is the term devolo. And an experience when I was young in Tonga happened a few times that it sticks to my mind, where particularly women would go through a mental breakdown, and such a mental breakdown that the whole village sees it. They're either tearing at themselves, or they're just going through an episode. And one of the things that they would say is that there's a devil on my back, or there's a devil making me do it. And that has stuck with me as well. And so bringing it to modern times, like I think certain behaviours we all do, and where the F did that come from? Like, why am I doing this? I sort of, again, it's trying to make a connection with either ideas or memories to like real life and real experiences, really.
But that's kind of interesting as well, because this idea of Divolo, which is very similar to there's some stories about similar things happening for Māori as well, and across many
personified in something unseen.
Which is a ghost or a spirit or something else. I think that's really interesting, particularly when you talk about these new works, the Love and War works, because it is that idea of bachelling.
Yeah.
Like, you know, from Christianity we have good and evil, but it also love and war. But actually, in a lot of indigenous cultures, it's not polemic.
They have to go together always.
Yeah, but but do you think it's not necessarily about one or the other? That
No.
there's lots of things in between.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it is biographical again, those works. That is me as love and war. You know, without going too deep into it. You know, even just the idea of gender as well. Like, you know, yes, I am a man, but you know, there are attributes and thoughts and feelings that I feel are very feminine. You know, there are very destructive things that I've done and probably still do. So, you know, the personifications of these figures, you know, is very much alive in us and, you know, around the world, I think. Does that make sense? Yeah.
But do you think there's like elements that sit in between that? So,
of course. Yeah. I mean, even the fact that, so I play with that idea, Karl, like, if you can see war is actually holding the apple, and Venus, love, is actually holding the spear. You know, those are symbols of love and war, but have actually mixed it around. And so, in fact, love is holding the spear, and war is holding the apple. And again, that, you know, that sort of connection to the Bible as well. But if you do a deep dive into Venus and Mars, you know, there's the attributes that I'm playing around with as well. But then also in turn, you're matching, you're switching up the emotions and the ideas that go with it as well. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm doing a bit of a switch now because I'm really interested with this. This exhibition is a lot about your photographic practice, but you actually work across lots of different materials.
Yeah.
So a lot of the backdrops are paintings. You do constructions, you do sculpture.
I couldn't find the proper spear that I wanted for Mars, so I actually carved that out of a curtain rod. So, you know, sometimes you just have to make things, because I was trying, you know, I try and cheat all the time, but I just couldn't find a spear that, you know, would sort of give off. And some of the reference drawings that I used for costumes and the objects was from Pompeii, you know, because I was on the frescoes. But, and Tonga as well, but yeah.
Well, what I was going to ask about was this shift to taking your photography into other forms like banners.
Yes.
What was the motivation for that?
I think, because of the space, and so really, you know, when you work with certain galleries, with budget and space limitations or no limitations, you can push the ideas a bit further. And because the three characters that were tormenting the victim, so the golden naked figure is just called the victim, and it's based on that childhood memory I was telling you about before. And then the three divas behind it. One's ribbon, one's flower, and one is hula skirts, and one is called Lucha, Norma, and Carmen, opera divas, and then again, you know, connection to personalities and all that stuff. So I think impact, visual impact, I think making the victim sort of prime and centre, because I mean that is the story. And then on the wall in the show Campbelltown, so the three figures were just floating in the middle of the room, and then around it was the divas, sort of, you know, being divas, looking, you know, all diverish on the side, and the poor victim, you know, doing all the victim poses. But it was also just another chance to see where my photography can go off the wall and see how they live and sort of, you know, flutter in the air and the space. And as Karl pointed out, you know, like now I'm at that comfortable position, I suppose, in my career that I can move on to other media. So in the same show, I had my first animated videos. And it was just three figures dancing based on the opposite of the three graces. So that's another reason why I do 3, don't ask me why. But earlier works were covering the 3 graces, the idea of beauty, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, going back to the show at Campbelltown, those 3 animated figures are the opposite of that 3 fates. So, you know, you're born, you live your life, and then you bloody die. So, yeah, it's definitely moving into new media. At the moment, Sydney Festival, they want to show more of the digital stuff, which is interesting because of the site, I suppose. And so, yeah, I'm finding that new media is opening up the doors for different ways of showing the photographs, really. And the great thing about the digital animation was because my friend Nick Shackleton, who helps me with the photographs in the backyard, he's also now the company that I go to work with the animations. And so, because we've known each other for a long time, he's got these amazing skills in new media. We're looking at sort of more animated works with a bit more of a storyline, but using the crazy characters of TONGPOP.
Now a bit of a shift. Because your work, you're having more, I guess, bigger platforms for people to see your work.
Yeah.
Have you had any pushback from the Tongan community about the way you represent certain things?
Maybe should I tell them the story of my own family? So, not from the Tongan community, but I've actually had pushback from my own family in Tonga. So I did a little portrait of a fairly important figure in our family tree, someone with, you know, sort of noble and royal standing, and this should be my great-great-grandmother, a relation of Queen Salote, all of that stuff. And I had done an artwork for my cousin and my auntie because that's her namesake, Luciana Halavala. And anyway, I just did my usual thing, gifted, and you know, I gave it to my cousin and my auntie. I do that a lot. I make artworks and I also gift them, and or do portraits for families only, painting portraits. And yeah, next minute there was a big fight on Facebook because the powers that be in Tonga, particularly the aunties who are a little bit more higher in status and obviously are still part of that nobility thing in Tonga, yeah, they lost their shit and literally said, take it down. You're not allowed to use that. That's, you know, that's... And then so my side, they're like, that's your great-grandmother too, you can keep it up. And then the other side's like, no, he has to ask permission, blah, 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 blah. I mean, if that's not... like, I'm not worried about the Tonga community at all here in New Zealand. It's my own family. So yeah, that was quite an interesting... I mean, I'm not saying that, like, you know, how dare they? Like, I do know, you know, all of this stuff, and I didn't expect it to happen, but it certainly happened. And, you know, that censoring, you'd think was censored by my community, but in fact it wasn't. It was censored by my direct family, straight from Tonga. Yeah.
That's interesting,
yeah.
Because I didn't know that story.
You didn't, and it's
when
not... Well, I mean, you asked the right question, and the audience looks like they're trusted. You're not going to go back to the Tongan Secret Service and tell them. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like that idea of censorship, that idea of, you know, being accepted by a community. I think, you know, I'm very spoiled in Aotearoa to really, really be surrounded by a lot of Pacific Islander minor people here, whereas in Australia it's getting a bit, but you know, wasn't, you know, I didn't feel like I was surrounded by a lot of islanders or minor people in Australia, whereas here I do. And lots of support, and of course, you know, a bit of shade from some, but that's fine. We can sort it out the back.
I've just got one more question and then we might open it up to the audience. I'm kind of interested, just carrying on from that line, how things have been different here, because effectively you've been a full-time artist in New Zealand. It was very different when you were in Australia and you were working full-time as a teacher. How's that kind of transition been? Because you talk about you having lots of support for your practice.
I think a great way to put it is, you know, I'm obviously getting some attention in Australia. I've gotten some attention from commercial galleries and an advice from a very good friend, said, listen, Aotearoa of New Zealand, it's given you your career. And so, great Australia's paying attention now, but, if I'd started my career in Australia, would it have taken off as much as it has here in Aotearoa? Would it have spoken, a lot more to people in Australia than it has in Aotearoa? I think Australia's doing that classic thing where if someone becomes big, then they take ownership of that person. And I'm not big, but I think that's, that's something like, oh, he's Australian too, but I think, the work was made here. I can't tell you the work would be the same if I'd made it in Australia. I think definitely the audience, not just Moana people or Māori, but even, everybody else here in Aotearoa, I think it speaks to them because they've grown up, with these imagery, with the patterns, with the history of Ngatu and different other Pacific Islander Moana countries. So I just feel like it's, it was the right place to make the art, I think. And I mean, even now when I still work with some Australian galleries, or, working with certain Australian curators, and there's a different language that Aotearoa and people from the art world here speak that Australians don't. And so I know there's certain words and things that I can just comfortably speak about here. Whereas in Australia, I do have to edit myself now. Yeah?
How do you have to do that?
Oh, I say kia ora all the time, and so people are like, huh? And then even just, we're talking about, someone was asking about the goddess figure, and I said, oh, the atua. And so just basic things, I think, the population knows, lots of Māori words here, and even Tongan words. And so, yeah, I have to edit myself in Australia because, you just can't chuck in, Māori Tongan words willy-nilly in Australia because they're just like, what the hell are you talking about? Whereas here I find out, it's quite easy to. Everybody, either knows or has a general sense of what the hell you're talking about.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Could you talk briefly about, you arrived in Australia when you were age 9. What was the process of going back to Tonga?
Oh my God. So the first process was...
The second question is, the globe that shows the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes. It was a bit naff if I had Tonga right in the middle. I thought, let's go somewhere else where, colonisation really got to. So what was it?
First question was
Your reacquainting myself with Tonga.
Okay, so I always say that one of the words I always say in interviews and things like talking about that is, the movie Spirited Away, the Japanese animation. Like I always say that I was spirited away. That's that fantasy child talk. Like, yeah, I was spirited away to Australia. Spirited away is more of a violent, a nicer way to say it. It was quite a violent interjection, sort of ejection from Tonga, from being, taken from a village. I didn't have a mother and father in Tonga. They both sort of, went off somewhere else, and so I was whāngai in different villages. Eventually, it was my grandfather who sort of got me one night, literally just took me, and then prepared me to go to Australia. That was when I had my first portrait taken. So my first photograph of me is not as a baby or toddler, it's at the airport, the passport photo. That's another reason why I love photography as well, that's sort of the idea of capturing images. And then, won't go too much into sort of whānau issues or whatever. Anyway, it didn't last with my stepmother and my father. I was kicked out at the age of 14. But quite funny that one of the threats of my stepmother was, because I was quite a naughty kid, if you believe it or not. I was quite naughty. And one of her threats was, I'm going to send you back to Tonga. And it was like, do it. But she'd never sort of do it. Anyway, she did actually kick me out eventually, so she didn't quite send me back to Tonga. But she did kick me out at the age of 14. And so I just lived in Australia up until, when about mid-20s, I thought I need to go back. And there was always a sense that I did want to go back, but, you know, as you know with many reunion movies, it doesn't end happy. And so my trip back in my mid-20s was bittersweet. You know, I was a man, I was loud, I was not the little Tongan kid who left. I couldn't really speak Tongan anymore. You know, even just basic, you know, functions at a ceremonial with family, hierarchical stuff, completely forgot. So even right down to went to a funeral or tangi, and I was with my uncle, and, you know, just naturally I would go and, you know, talk to the aunties or whatever, and, you know, just one of those things that I didn't do. And so my uncle said, you know, get your ass over to the men, you know, like, so just little social norms, you know. I mean, I don't live there anymore. So, you know, I got a real lovely sort of connection again to Tonga, the land, the whanua, you know, all of that stuff. But, you know, also being part of a particular family in Tonga as well, you know, that's a lot to take on. And if you can't meet your expectations, then, you know, you just sort of step back. But that was the last time I went back, mid-20s. And as I said, it was bittersweet, and I just went back to Australia and just sort of accepted the fate that I will never ever, you know, live in Tonga. But I've told my husband that when I die, he's going to take me back in an envelope and scatter me across. He hasn't agreed to it yet. I keep telling him he thinks I'm like lying, but that's what I want. Yeah, so, and, you know, my work literally, you know, always has an injection or just a little something of Tonga, always. I think it will always be, you know. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions out there? Anything burning? Yes.
Could you talk more about some of the meanings behind that series of traditional drum band?
Oh, do you really want to go there?
Yes,
Identity politics. I mean, you know, to have a term like a professional brown man, I mean, what does that tell you? Like a persona that someone's taken on, you know, a feeling of inadequacy, you know, what you wear is who you are, you know. And so it's theatre, right? Life is theatre. So, you know, the costumes of a suit, you know, if you look at the history of suit, the meaning of power, men, you know, in this case, as I was growing up, you know, the importance of looking the part or fitting into somewhere that you've been to, or the first time you've been to and you feel a bit inadequate because you're a bit poor, or you know, like all of those things came into that work. And I suppose it sort of helped me to sort of create, to sort of come up with a bit of a bravado so you don't feel so inadequate. I mean, we're all going to feel inadequate about something, you know, and you just have to accept some, and others you sort of just hide behind. And I found that clothes, particularly, was a nice sort of tool for, like, you know, creating a character, wearing it out in public, and also just giving you sort of a sense of confidence. Yeah, I think.
Did you aspire to be a professional?
No, so again, there's like with every one of my work, there's a story behind that term, and I will credit a friend of mine who gave me that term, because when I was a teacher, he'd always sort of found it quite odd that I always sort of still maintained research into Pacific Islander culture, or, you know, I would wear, like when the king died of Tonga and King Tabo, we went to this art function and I wore a full, like, proper mourning mat, which, if you know, Sydney is quite bougie, and so everywhere I was walking there was like trails of, I was talking, and so what was it?
Did you aspire to be a professional brown man?
No, of course not, but I certainly love the character of it, like the one that I played, I found that I was playing, like you don't know that you are. You know, as you can tell, I'm sort of confident, but obviously there's other sides that I find quite inadequate. And, you know, I mean, even in Australia particularly, you know, that term of professional brown man you sort of have to do, because otherwise they don't know who the F you are, they don't care. And so you sometimes have to, invent a little, story or a persona. And anyway, a long story short, the term came, and it was rightly so, because, he noticed that I would not change, but, I would sort of have different characteristics for different area, different things or different functions. And so there was a time there that, he said, "Are you being a professional brown man tonight?" And I said, "Yep." And, it was a nice term for, for something that I sort of have been trying to articulate. What is this about me? Who is this part of me that, is so invested into sort of not hiding who I am, but just, trying to fit into a certain stereotype or play a certain character. I mean, I don't know how many dinners or functions that I've been to that, an older person would say, "Do you play rugby league?" Sure. I mean, that is just a little aspect of a professional brown man, because, no one would ever think that I was a teacher, or no one would ever think that I was, good at art, or, there was just a particular window of a stereotype that you needed to fit into. Does that make sense?
Does anyone have any other questions? I've got one.
No more.
Just last one from me. Because it's something that we haven't really touched on. I'm interested to know how queer politics or gender roles
Good
play
question.
into your work.
That's a great question, because, again, one of those major parts of my work is about gender, sexuality, particularly sexuality. And again, it goes back to my culture, it goes back to my childhood in Tonga. And so if you imagine a 1980s Tongan telly seeing, Tongan men of all persuasions, of all different levels of government, of hierarchy, of money, of status. I saw women of many different types of femininity, and I also saw men of different types of femininity, wearing different attires. And so I grew up in Australia very comfortable with the idea of many genders. And then, of course, those things can get unlearned, because in Australia, I grew up then with terms like, men don't do that, or pink's not a boy's colour, I mean, I had never had any of that pre-Australia, and so, not coming from any particular, even particularly Tongan family men, quite the machismo, maintaining that sort of, boys wear blue, girls wear pink, you act a certain way, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't dress up in women, all of those things were experiences that I had, growing up in Australia. And so being very, I came out quite early, not because of some revolutionary thing. It was just, I suppose when you grow up by yourself a lot, you build a certain hardness and a certain confidence. And, I was quite sexually active very young, and I grew up in the suburbs of Sydney, southwest, which I suppose is equivalent to Aotearoa or the Hut. So again, a very machismo type of world, and it's, I suppose, just being comfortable in my own skin. I know it's such a wanky thing to say, but completely comfortable in my sexuality and my gender, and completely comfortable with other people's choices of, or not choice, but of their gender and their sexuality as well.
Okay, well, we might leave it there.
And I think certain modes of femininity I do quite well, I have to say. Because I get asked a lot, who do you get to play that one? It's like, it's me. And going back to, I did watch a lot of Maria Callas old clips for videos for things. I watched lots of Dolly Parton. So characterizations of woman, RuPaul as well as another one we watch regularly. You can't, if you learn from those things when you watch
But it's also like we all have 1,000 faces, as you were saying.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
And I'm only up to like, what, 20 of them? So there's still another 950 to go.
so on that note, keep your eyes peeled for the other 900.
Malo, Karl. Malo, Pito. Thank you.
Should I hand over to you? Thank you all for coming on behalf of me and Telly, and for getting some insights into Telly's work. And as he said, he is working on a big project for Sydney Festival. So again, that will be coming up. And he's also got a solo show at Bergman later in the year as well.
October, yeah. Thank you, Karl.
Cool, thank you, Karl, for facilitating this wonderful talk with Telly, and thank you, Telly, for your fantastic, well-spoken addressing of your work.
Thanks to the audience. You made it look
and
full
thank you
today.
for your time.
Free to go.
Feel free. Yes, I remember seeing you. Yeah.